Elara knelt on stone gone cold before dawn, and the first thing she felt was not the whip, but the chill climbing from her knees into her spine. They called her the Ash Omega, and for 6 years she had answered to nothing else. Blood ran warm over her lower lip where the silver-tipped lash had opened the skin, and beneath her the moon emblem carved into the courtyard floor caught the first drop before it could fall into the dust. Seraphine Vale came down the ceremony steps in white, a spotless handkerchief already folded in her palm, already rehearsed for the moment she would press it to Elara's mouth and be seen doing it. "Someone like you should never dream of being seen by the moon," she said, loud enough for the balconies to hear, soft enough to sound like mercy. Elara did not answer. She lifted her eyes instead past Seraphine's white gown, past the future Lunas watching in silk from the carved rails above, to the one man who had not moved since the whip first cracked. Alpha Kale Draven stood among the council with his jaw locked and his hands empty at his sides, and his stillness cut into her deeper than any strap of silver had. She had no way of knowing that his silence was not indifference, or that the same silence had been guarding her since the year she was born. Her blood struck the silver moon carved into the stone. Every lamp in the hall flickered at once, and for one held breath a pale moon rose into the daylight sky above Blackthorn and was gone. High Priest Malrek turned first, his face drained of color. "The sign has appeared," he said to no one, and to everyone. She must not live to see the blood moon. Before the Luna selection ceremony ever arrived, Elara's days had already worn themselves into a shape she no longer questioned. She rose before the sun to scrub the arena stones, to wash blood from the Alphas' armor, to carry ashes out of the fortress braziers, and to bury the animals killed in training before the noble families woke to see them. When a warrior died, and his family was too important to touch the body themselves, that task fell to her too. No one had ever asked whether she minded. She slept in the Omega quarters on a pallet with one thin blanket, an iron cup, a single spare dress, and an old wooden broom worn smooth at the handle from years of sweeping blood out from beneath the feet of the powerful. The broom was hers in a way nothing else in Blackthorn was. No one called her Elara. The pack had a shorter word for what she was, and it never changed no matter how many years passed or how many wounds she cleaned. She had no awakened wolf, no known family beyond the mother she could not remember, no mate bond, and no rank beyond the general instruction to obey. She did not carry herself like a woman planning rebellion. She watched instead the way a person watches weather before it turns, and she remembered every small cruelty long after the ones who committed it had forgotten. When the younger Omegas went hungry, she found ways to share what little she had. When old wolves were abandoned by families who considered weakness a kind of shame, she was the one who sat with them until they stopped shaking. The ceremony itself transformed the fortress into something Elara barely recognized. Silver banners dropped from the high windows. White flowers lined every staircase the noble daughters would use to descend one by one, in front of alpha heirs who had been raised since childhood to expect exactly this kind of offering. Elara knelt near the base of the stairs that morning, scrubbing blood left behind from the previous night's alpha trials, close enough to hear every name called, and far enough that no one thought to look at her. Seraphine Vale entered to applause that started before she had even reached the doorway. She came down the stairs, slowly paused to lift the child who had been placed in her path by her own servants, and let the elders watch her comfort him. It was a small performance, repeated often enough that Elara no longer felt surprise. Only a dull recognition of how easily a crowd could be handed exactly what it wanted to see. Seraphine was the daughter of High Alpha Vale, raised from infancy toward one destination, Kale's crown. Before the pack she was composed, generous, and endlessly patient. Behind the doors of her own chamber she measured other people's worth by how useful they might become to her, and she had never once in Elara's memory apologized for anything she did not get caught doing. Lysandra Thorne moved through the same halls with a different kind of skill. She collected secrets the way other women collected jewelry, filing away which Alpha owed, which debt, which marriage had been arranged to hide, which scandal, always ready to trade what she knew for something better. Mirelle Voss, daughter of the High Priest, wore devotion like a second skin, presiding over Moon Temple rituals that conveniently arranged themselves around whichever alliance her father favored that season. In public, the three women called each other sisters. In private, Alara had overheard enough to know they treated one another as temporary allies, useful only until someone more convenient came along. Seraphine wanted Kale and the title that came with him. Lysandra wanted whichever alpha carried the deepest coffers. Morel wanted Moon Temple's authority extended over every pack in the region. Their charity, Alara had noticed, only ever appeared when someone worth impressing was watching. The day Seraphine distributed food to the Omega quarters in front of visiting elders, her own servants quietly reclaimed most of it the moment the witnesses left. 3 smiles at one table, 3 knives beneath it, and every blade, sooner or later, was pointed at the girl who owned nothing but a broom. The closest Alara came to real danger that season had nothing to do with ceremony. During an alpha training exhibition, a young Omega boy named Finn was dragged into the arena as bait for a half-starved wolf, pulled in from the forest, meant to give the trainees a chance to prove their courage by killing it before it reached him. When the warriors hesitated, laughing among themselves, entertained by his terror, Alara dropped the bucket she had been carrying and ran into the ring. She pulled Finn behind her and turned to face an animal twice her size. The wolf lunged once. Kael reached the gate before it landed and looked directly into its eyes without touching it. The wolf lowered itself flat against the ground, and the arena went silent in a way Alara had never heard it go silent before. "Take the child out." Kael said, his voice flat, and then he turned away without looking at her, without acknowledging what she had done at all. Alara carried Finn out on legs that would not stop shaking, gratitude and anger arriving in her chest at exactly the same moment. He had kept her from dying. He had also just walked away as though her courage were something to be managed rather than seen. Seraphine noticed the length of Kael's gaze before he turned it away, and that night she made sure the story changed shape. Finn was beaten for causing a disturbance, and his mother was made to stand before the pack and thank Seraphine for saving her son. Alara said nothing because Seraphine had already promised quietly that the boy's entire family would be exiled if the truth left Alara's mouth. She understood, watching Seraphine accept praise for a rescue she had never performed, that the future Lunas were not simply cruel. They had found a way to turn every ounce of Omega suffering into proof of their own goodness. Later that week, passing near the temple delegation's quarters with a basket of linens, Alara heard Lysandra mention almost carelessly that several young Omegas sent to Moon Temple over the past year had never returned. Morel's answer came just as lightly. "They did not disappear," she said. "They simply became what was necessary for a worthy Luna to receive the moon's blessing." Alara did not understand the words yet, only the cold that spread through her at hearing them. She went back to her small room that night, meaning only to sleep. Instead, she found a cracked silver pendant resting on her thin blanket, its chain broken, its surface tarnished with age. Beneath it, written in something dark that had dried into the shape of letters, was a single line: "Come to Silver Forest if you want to know why they fear you." She sat with the pendant in her palm for a long time before she blew out the candle, turning the warning over and over, trying to decide whether it was a threat or the first true thing anyone had ever told her. She thought of the broom leaning against the wall by her pallet, and of how many nights she had measured her worth by how clean she left the stones behind her. No elder had ever thanked her for it. No noble daughter had ever learned her name well enough to use it by accident. She had built her sense of herself out of small private acts no one witnessed. A blanket passed to a shivering child, water carried to an old wolf, too proud to ask for it, silence kept when speaking the truth would have cost someone else their home. She had told herself for years that this was enough, that being useful and being invisible were close enough to the same thing, that she did not need to want more. The pendant did not agree with her. It sat cold and heavier than its size in her palm, as though it already knew something about her that she had spent her whole life refusing to consider. The days that followed the pendant's arrival moved with a strange, careful quiet, as though Blackthorn itself were holding its breath. Alara told no one what she had found. She wore the broken chain beneath her collar and returned to her work scrubbing floors that would only be walked on again by morning, and waiting for a moment she did not yet understand. That moment arrived during the second night of the ceremony in the great hall beneath the central moon altar. Seraphine, Lysandra, and Morel had spent the previous days arranging something far more precise than gossip. Morel had obtained a bitter forbidden herb from the temple's oldest stores. Lysandra had distracted the servants responsible for the ceremonial wine long enough to make a substitution possible. Seraphine herself exchanged the tray meant for Alara's hands with one carrying a single poisoned silver cup prepared for Elder Rowan. The plan was simple enough to admire in its cruelty. Rowan would drink collapse before the assembled pack, and Seraphine would step forward with an antidote already hidden in her sleeve, saving him publicly while Alara was executed for the poisoning she had never committed. Alara carried the tray into the hall with both hands as she had done 100 times before. Elder Rowan stood near the altar and Seraphine waited several steps behind him, her sleeve already heavy with the vial she would soon produce like a miracle. Morel watched from among the temple delegation. Lysandra positioned herself near the nearest exit in case Alara tried to run. As Rowan lifted the cup toward his mouth, Alara caught a bitter thread beneath the wine's sweetness, faint enough that most would have missed it entirely. She struck the base of the cup with her wrist before she had fully decided to move. It fell and shattered against the stone, and the wine that spilled across the white moonflowers arranged around the altar blackened them within seconds, curling the petals into smoke. Seraphine's scream arrived instantly. "She tried to murder Elder Rowan. I stopped him from drinking it," Alara said, pointing at the ruined flowers, but the words landed in a room that had already decided what it wanted to believe. Seraphine stepped between Alara and the elder, drew the vial from her sleeve, and held it up as though she had only just discovered the poison herself. "You dropped the cup because you knew you had been seen," she said, and Lysandra confirmed it at once, claiming she had watched Alara switch the trays with her own eyes. Morel invoked the authority of the temple and declared that no Omega's word could outweigh that of a future Luna. No one searched Seraphine. No one asked why she already carried the cure in her sleeve before anyone else knew there had been a poisoning at all. They dragged Alara across the floor by both arms until her knees struck the moon emblem carved into the stone, the same mark her blood had touched only days before. A guard placed the whip in Seraphine's hand, and Seraphine, with a performance of reluctance she had clearly practiced, refused it. "I cannot punish her myself," she said. "Let the pack's law decide." The guard did what Seraphine could not bring herself to be seen doing. When the last strike had fallen, Seraphine descended the steps, pressed a white cloth to Alara's mouth, and leaned close enough that only Alara could hear her. "You should have remained invisible," she whispered. Alara searched for Kael across the hall and found him standing beside the council, hands locked behind his back, watching without moving exactly as he had at the first ceremony. She read his stillness as cowardice, because she had no reason yet to read it any other way. It was not only his silence that struck her. It was the memory of the arena of the wolf he had lowered without touching it, of a man who could command an animal twice her size into stillness, but could not seem to command his own voice in front of the council. She had spent years telling herself that surviving Blackthorn required exactly this kind of restraint, that a person who wanted to keep breathing learned when to look away. Watching him now, she wondered for the first time whether restraint and cowardice were not always the same thing, wearing different clothes. Her blood struck the moon symbol a second time. Every lamp in the hall flickered together, and somewhere beyond the walls the ceremonial wolves began to howl in a single unbroken chord. A pale moon rose into the daylight sky and vanished as quickly as it had come. Malrek recognized the sign immediately. Kael recognized something else entirely, a mark he had last seen on an infant 16 years ago, and the recognition passed across his face before he could stop it. Seraphine caught both reactions and understood in that instant that the woman she had just had whipped was not merely an inconvenient servant to be managed and discarded. Malrek confirmed it under his breath. "The sign has appeared again. She must die before the blood moon." Seraphine did not fear Ilara for her face or for the attention Kael would not stop paying her. She had known since childhood that if the true moon chosen ever awakened, every Luna raised through bloodline and arrangement would lose the ground beneath her feet, herself included. Rather than order an execution, she might later regret Seraphine chose patience, instead deciding to use the coming days to learn whether the moon's power could be taken from one body and placed inside another. Morel confirmed that the old temple records described exactly such a ritual, and that several Omega girls already lost to it had simply been reported as runaways. Seraphine ordered Alara released back into the Omega quarters to be watched rather than killed, left frightened and isolated enough to lead them straight to whatever truth she was chasing. That night Alara slipped past the gates and into Silver Forest, the pendant's faint glow, the only light guiding her. Kael watched her go from the fortress tower, and when two temple assassins fell in behind her at a distance, he took his sword from the wall and left without informing the council of anything. The forest was said to hold the spirits of wolves who had betrayed their own packs, and it felt to Alara exactly as unwelcoming as its reputation promised. She found a ruined stone cottage deep inside it, and a blind old woman waiting there who did not ask her name. "Have you ever heard the moon cry?" the woman asked instead. Her name was Myera, and what she told Alara that night unmade everything Alara had ever assumed about her own worthlessness. The moon goddess Myera said had never granted alphas the right to rule absolutely. In the beginning, power had been divided so that wolves could protect each other rather than compete. Alphas received strength for battle. Lunas received the ability to heal and connect their communities, and Omegas received something quieter and no less vital, the ability to absorb pain and keep a pack from being consumed by its own violence. The first alphas had rewritten that law, turning strength into ownership and reducing Omega to a servant class, and the moon had gone silent for centuries because the wolves had broken their oldest oath. The cracked pendant, Myera explained, belonged to an order called the Moonkeepers, women who had never been queens, only the keepers of a truth, someone always wanted buried. Alara was not a lost princess. She was the last descendant of a moonkeeper who had tried to carry evidence of the old law to Moon Temple and had been murdered before she ever reached it. That woman had been Alara's mother. "Why didn't you save her?" Alara asked. Myera's answer came slowly. "Because I was afraid. I told myself survival was wisdom, but silence was the blade that finished what their assassins began." She had hidden in Silver Forest ever since, not out of wisdom but out of guilt. And what she offered Alara now was not perfection, but a debt she was finally trying to repay. She taught Alara to listen for the pain carried inside other wolves, and when Alara touched the roots of a nearby silver tree, she felt Finn's old fear and the exhaustion of Omegas she had never met pressing into her like weather. "Your gift is not the power to make others kneel," Myera told her. "It is the willingness to carry what they cannot survive alone." Alara pushed back against the idea that her suffering had automatically made her good. "Does the moon expect me to keep accepting whatever they do to me?" "Compassion is not submission," Myera said. "Mercy without truth only protects the cruel." Alara turned the words over the way she had turned the pendant over in her palm days earlier, looking for the trap in them and finding instead something closer to relief. No one had ever told her that gentleness and weakness were different things. No one had ever suggested that the years she had spent absorbing other people's suffering, without asking for anything in return, might be a kind of strength rather than proof of how little she was worth. She did not fully believe it yet. She wanted to. The assassins found the clearing before either of them could say anything else. Kael reached it first, throwing both men to the ground before they came within arm's length of Alara, and their clothing carried the unmistakable mark of Moon Temple. "They were not coming to take you home," Kael said. "They were coming to remove your heart." Alara demanded to know why he had followed her at all, and he refused to answer with hunters still closing in around them. Myera looked at him and recognized for the first time the boy who had once carried an infant out of Blackthorn in his own arms. Before she could say his name aloud, an arrow marked with Seraphine's crest tore through the trees and buried itself in her chest. Kael moved between Alara and the second arrow before it could find her. Alara caught Myera as she fell, and the old woman pressed a small key into her palm with the last of her strength. "This opens the forbidden library beneath Moon Temple," Myera said. "Your mother's last words are waiting there. Do not become the woman they expect pain to create." She died before Alara could ask her anything else. Seraphine's hunters closed around the clearing within minutes, and Kael fought a path through them, while ordering Alara toward the old tunnels beneath the fortress. She would not leave Myera's body exposed to the forest, and Kael carried the old woman himself far enough to lay her beneath the silver tree before turning back to face what was coming for both of them. From the edge of the clearing, mounted and unhurried, Seraphine watched the wreckage of her own ambush and found without much effort an entirely different story to tell. "Alpha Kael has been bewitched by an Omega," she called out loud enough to be believed, and the hunt for a moon witch began before the blood on the ground had even dried. Kael led Alara down through a stairwell hidden behind a collapsed section of the old fortress wall, moving fast enough that she had to half-run to keep pace with him. Above them, Seraphine's soldiers were already sealing the roads leading out of Blackthorn. Lysandra, working a different angle entirely, had quietly sent word to a Lycan lord, offering to deliver Ilara in exchange for a marriage that would raise her own standing. Morel, meanwhile, had begun preparing a ritual meant to draw the moon's power out of one body and settle it inside another, exactly as the old records described. Ilara stopped walking the moment the tunnel widened enough to let her. "If you knew they wanted me dead," she said, "why did you stand there and watch them treat me like an animal?" Kale did not answer immediately. He crossed to a section of stone that looked to Ilara's eye no different from any other and pressed his palm against it until a hidden door gave way. Inside was a small room that had clearly not been opened in years, dust thick, over an old infant's cradle and a ceremonial knife resting beside it untouched since whatever had last happened there. "I was 16, Kael said, when my father ordered me to kill a newborn marked by the moon." He told her the rest without softening any of it. He had walked into that room with the knife already in his hand and found that he could not use it. An epidemic had taken another infant that same week, and he had exchanged the bodies, carried the moon-marked child into the Omega quarters himself, and falsified the burial record so the council would believe her dead. He had kept his distance for years afterwards, certain that any visible affection would expose exactly what he had done. Ilara stood very still, understanding two things at once, and neither of them canceled the other out. The man she had spent years resenting had saved her life before she could remember having one. The same man had also allowed her to grow up scrubbing blood from other people's floors and had said nothing done, nothing, while she was whipped in front of an entire pack. "You saved me from one knife," she said, "and left me beneath 1,000 others." Kale did not defend himself. "I saved you from death," he said, "but I did not save you from the life they gave you instead. I no longer know which failure was crueler." He had believed for 16 years that secret protection was enough. Ilara made him understand in the space of a few sentences that silence in the face of injustice was not neutral. It was its own kind of participation. Before either of them could say anything more, soldiers found the hidden room, and there was no more time left for reckoning with the past. They fought their way toward the passage leading to Moon Temple and reached it just as Seraphine arrived with Morel and the full Alpha Council behind her. A mark had already begun to glow on Seraphine's neck, faint and silver, and Morel announced in a voice pitched for the entire hall to hear that Moon Temple had confirmed Seraphine and Kale as destined mates. "The moon has chosen its Luna," Seraphine said. "The Omega beside him is nothing but a corrupting witch." Kael recognized the mark for what it was the instant he saw it false, and powered by something closer to blood than to fate. Seraphine, standing close enough that only he could hear her, made the price of denial clear without raising her voice at all. If he refused the bond in front of the assembled warriors, Ilara would be executed before the hour ended. Kael stepped to Seraphine's side. He did it to buy time, though nothing in his face said so, and Ilara, watching the same man who had just confessed to saving her life stand willingly beside the woman responsible for Myera's murder, understood the gesture the only way it was possible to understand it from where she stood. She believed in that moment that he had chosen the crown after all. Seraphine ordered her seized. As the guards dragged Ilara toward the passage to Moon Temple, Kale called after her the only warning he had time to give. "Do not trust any mark that glows with blood." Ilara did not yet understand what he meant. Seraphine smiled because she did, and because the false bond sustaining her had been fed night after night on blood drawn from Omega's Moon Temple had never released. They took Ilara down beneath the temple into a prison she had not known existed, where more than a dozen missing Omega girls were still alive, chained in rows along a corridor that smelled of iron and old wax. Some of them had lost the ability to shift at all. Others had been drained so many times their bodies could no longer heal fully between sessions. A few had been taught patiently and deliberately that being chosen for sacrifice was the closest thing to honor a girl like them would ever receive. Ilara sat against this cold wall and let that understanding settle over her slowly the way cold settles into stone. She had spent her whole life believing herself ignored because she was worthless. Watching Morel draw a thin line of blood from her wrist that first night beneath the temple, feeding it into a moonstone, meant to keep Seraphine's stolen bond alive. She understood instead that she had been watched far more closely than she ever imagined by people with far crueler intentions than simple indifference. One of the chained girls, thin and pale in the low torchlight, watched Ilara without speaking for a long time before she finally found her voice. They told us the moon chose Seraphine, the girl said. Is that true? No, Elara said. It chose to go silent instead. She did not know yet what that silence meant or what it would take to end it, but she understood sitting in that corridor surrounded by women the pack had already decided to forget that waiting quietly for someone else to fix what had been done to her would only repeat the same pattern that had shaped her entire life. Somewhere above her, Seraphine was already preparing to make the false bond permanent, and somewhere beyond that, the man who had saved her, once as an infant and failed her a dozen times since, was standing beside her enemy buying a kind of time neither of them yet knew how to spend. She did not wait long to act on it. Night after night Morel came to draw blood and left without noticing how closely Elara studied the rhythm of the guards, the worn hinges, the moments when attention slackened between one watch and the next. Elara began reaching for the other chained girls the way Mayra had taught her in the forest, touching the cold iron at their wrists and letting herself feel a fraction of what each of them carried alone. The weight of it staggered her the first few times. It also gave her something she had never had inside Blackthorn, other people who understood without being told twice exactly what she meant when she said it was time to move. They coordinated in whispers, passed hand to hand along the corridor. Keys were stolen a link at a time, guards were drawn away by manufactured noise, and within days a dozen girls who had been told for months that no one was coming had built quietly and without permission a way out for themselves. Lysandra, working her own angle, left one passage, deliberately unwatched, hoping Elara would flee straight into the arms of the Lycan force she had already promised. Elara noticed the convenience of that particular route before she trusted it, and chose it anyway, not to escape through it herself, but to draw attention away from the tunnel she sent the others through instead. She walked toward danger on purpose, so that women she had known for less than a week could walk away from it. Seraphine caught her exactly where she meant to be caught, in the main ritual hall beneath the temple, and had her brought before the council alongside Kael and the handful of prisoners who had not made it out in time. She ordered Kael to choose publicly between the future Luna and the Omega he was accused of protecting. Kael walked toward her. Elara watched him cross the floor and felt something in her chest go quiet in the specific way grief goes quiet before it becomes something louder. Then he drew a ceremonial blade, and instead of touching her, he cut through the mark glowing on Seraphine's throat. Black blood, and something that was not blood at all, burst from the wound, and threads of it visible now ran back across the hall to shatter jars hidden beneath the altar, each one filled with blood stolen from Omegas no one had ever accounted for. "The moon did not make this bond," Kael said, loud enough for every alpha in the room to hear him. "You built it from the blood of women you murdered." Before the council could decide what to do with that truth, every door in the hall sealed itself, and High Priest Malrek stepped into the light looking almost pleased. "Good," he said. "Every traitor has finally gathered in one place." He captured Kael, Elara, and the escaped prisoners together, and told them, without any apparent need to lie about it now, the three falsehoods that had held the Alpha Order together for longer than anyone in the hall had been alive. Alphas had never been chosen to rule. Lunas had never been created as rewards for powerful men. Omegas had never been born without the moon's blessing. The truth older than any of them was that Alphas carried strength for battle. Lunas carried the ability to heal and connect their people, and Omegas absorbed pain so that no pack would ever be consumed entirely by its own violence. The earliest Alphas had feared what Omega power could become if it were ever allowed to organize, and had spent generations making sure it never did. Malrek did not intend to kill Elara outright. He meant to draw her power out and place part of it inside Seraphine, instead presenting her as a moon-chosen Luna, while the old order continued underneath her borrowed authority exactly as before. While the council argued over what Malrek had just admitted Elara used Mayra's key on a door at the edge of the hall that led down into a library no living Alpha had opened in decades. Her mother's final scroll was waiting there, and it did not name Elara a queen the way she had half expected. It said only that when the lowest among them still chose to protect the very people who had trampled her, the moon would find its voice again. Her inheritance was not a crown. It was a capacity, nothing more, and what she did with it would decide everything the scroll could not. The alliance that had once called itself Sisterhood came apart in front of the whole hall almost as soon as Malrek's confession finished echoing off the stone. Lysandra wanted Ilara delivered to the Lycan Lord. Morel wanted her sacrificed exactly as doctrine demanded. Seraphine wanted her kept alive, so her power could be drained slowly and definitely for as long as it took. Lysandra poisoned Morel rather than lose the argument, and Morel, dying, used her last strength to announce to the entire council that Seraphine's mate bond had been fabricated from the start. Seraphine had the witnesses silenced and the blame placed instantly and without hesitation on Ilara. Then she brought an unconscious child into the hall and set him down at Ilara's feet. He was Lysandra's secret son, poisoned with the same substance Seraphine had already used once that night to remove an inconvenient rival. "Let him die," Seraphine said, "and we will see exactly how long the rest of them keep believing in your mercy." Lysandra fell to her knees before Ilara and begged her, without a trace of the composure she had worn for years, to save her son. She admitted in the same breath everything she had done to help build the cage. They were all standing inside, the rumors she had spread, the information she had sold, the beatings she had let happen because objecting had never once been worth the cost to her. Ilara understood exactly what saving the child would take. She understood, too, that she could refuse and use his death to force Lysandra's confession out of pure desperation instead. For a moment the choice sat in her chest like a stone she could have thrown either direction. She placed both hands on the boy's chest instead of choosing the easier cruelty. The poison moved out of him and into her, and pain spread through her bones in a way that made the whip across her back feel by comparison almost gentle. Her skin darkened along the veins of her arms. She collapsed and did not let go of him regardless, and the moon mark on her shoulder faint until that instant caught fire for the first time in her life. The boy opened his eyes. Lysandra broke apart, completely sobbing over a son she had nearly lost, while the woman she had spent years calling inferior gave him back to her at a cost Lysandra had never once been willing to pay for anyone. Ilara stayed conscious only long enough to say one thing. "Do not save me by silencing her," she told the guards moving to drag her away. "Let her speak." Lysandra stood before the council, the surviving prisoners, and the warriors still deciding which side to stand on, and told them everything. Seraphine had ordered the deaths of Omegas used in the forbidden rituals. Morel had spent years falsifying moon prophecies to control which marriages and mate bonds the temple would bless. Seraphine and Kael's bond had been built from stolen blood, not from anything the moon had chosen. The entire Luna selection ceremony had never been a sacred rite at all, only a performance stage to keep the old order looking legitimate. High Priest Malrek had spent decades feeding Omega blood into rituals meant to prop up alpha lines, whose real strength had been failing for generations. Seraphine tried to salvage her image the only way she knew how, turning on the nearest available scapegoat before anyone could turn on her first. She declared that Morel alone had corrupted the temple from the beginning, conveniently absent to defend herself, and for a moment it seemed the accusation might hold. Ilara rose, despite the poison still burning through her, and faced Seraphine directly. "Why would you save the child of a woman who helped destroy you?" Seraphine asked her, genuinely wanting to understand. "Because if I let pain turn me into you," Ilara said, "then you already won a long time ago." The moon mark released its first full wave of light, not at Seraphine, but through the entire prison beneath them. Chains that had held drained Omegas for months broke away from the walls on their own. Wolves who had lost the ability to shift felt strength return to limbs that had gone quiet for so long they had stopped expecting it. Kael tore free of the restraints holding him and reached Ilara's side without waiting to be told it was safe. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. And it was the first time since the night she was born that he had treated her as the one directing what happened next, rather than someone whose choices he felt obligated to manage. High Alpha Vale, watching his own daughter's authority collapsing in front of the assembled packs, ordered Seraphine to surrender before the council turned against their entire bloodline. Seraphine understood in the space of that single command that her father valued the survival of his own standing more than he valued her. She drove a blade into his chest before he could say anything else and took the High Alpha's emblem from his body while it was still warm. "If the moon will not choose me," she told the hall, "I will build a world without the moon." North Pack elders who had knelt to her father for 3 generations found themselves within a single night kneeling to his daughter instead, some out of loyalty, most out of fear of what refusing might cost their own bloodlines. Villages that had never questioned the Alpha Order before began questioning it loudly now, and Seraphine met every question with the same answer that Alara's rise threatened not only the crown, but the safety of every family whose survival depended on the old hierarchy remaining exactly as it was. She escaped with the Alpha Loyalists, the noble Lunas afraid of losing the selection system, the warriors who still believed compassion was weakness, and every pack whose wealth depended on Omega labor continuing exactly as it always had. Within days, she had turned Alara's refusal of a crown into proof of hidden ambition, claiming Alara intended to enslave every Alpha and place Omegas above the rest of the world by force. Fear of equality dressed carefully as fear of tyranny spread faster than the truth ever could. The freed Omegas and the Alphas willing to defect offered Alara the title of Moon Queen before the sun had fully risen the next day. She refused it. Replacing one worshipped ruler with another changes nothing, she said. Kael tried more than once to convince her to step back from the war building around them and let him carry the danger instead. She refused that too. You still see protection as the right to choose where I stand, she told him. I am not only afraid you will die, he admitted. I am afraid I will stand there and fail you again. Then stand beside me, she said. Not in front of me. He took a long moment before answering, longer than she expected, and when he finally spoke, his voice had none of the certainty a king was supposed to carry. For 16 years I told myself that keeping you alive was the same as keeping you safe, he said. I am only now understanding that they were never the same thing at all. Alara did not forgive him in that moment because forgiveness was not what either of them needed yet. She reached for his hand anyway, and for the first time since the red moon had first turned its light on both of their lives, neither of them let go out of duty. Their bond deepened in the weeks that followed without either of them completing it formally. Alara insisted they could only choose each other freely once both of them were free of war prophecy and obligation, and Kael, for once, did not argue with her about it. Seraphine, meanwhile, gathered an army large enough to make her earlier ambush look almost restrained. She captured hundreds of Omegas and imprisoned them beneath Moon Temple a second time. And during a separate raid, she captured Kael as well, delivering Alara an ultimatum written in a hand steady enough to prove she felt no doubt at all about what she was asking. Save Kael, the message read, or save the Omegas who would burn when the moon reached its highest point. Seraphine believed sending it that Alara would finally choose the man she loved over a room full of strangers and prove once and for all that she was exactly as selfish as every Luna who had come before her. She did not yet understand that Alara had already answered a version of that same question once, kneeling over a poisoned child who belonged to a woman who had helped destroy her and had chosen the harder thing without hesitating. Alara chose the imprisoned Omegas. She left Kael in Seraphine's hands, entering Moon Temple alone. Through the hidden passage Myara had once shown her, reaching the underground prison just as Seraphine's remaining guards prepared to set fire to the oil pooled beneath the cells. She used the same gift Myara had taught her in the forest, spreading the prisoner's fear and pain across the whole group so that no single person carried enough of it to break. And together they passed keys, forced weak links in the chains, and put out the fire before it could take hold. Kael, meanwhile, refused to wait for anyone to come and save him. Silver spikes had been driven through his restraints, and he tore free through the pain of it rather than staying chained until Alara arrived, because he had decided somewhere in the last few weeks that he needed to become someone capable of standing beside her rather than someone who was always waiting to be rescued or doing the rescuing himself. Seraphine watched her final trap fail from the ritual floor above and activated the ceremony Malrek had left prepared, drawing blood from hundreds of captured Omegas through channels cut into the temple stone. The false Luna sigil rose above the altar, and Seraphine lifted both hands, pulling the moon's visible light down out of the sky and into herself. The moon vanished entirely. Every wolf across the continent lost the ability to shift in the same instant. Mate bonds went silent, and alphas, who had built their entire authority on strength they believed permanent, watched it disappear along with the light. Packs that depended on that hierarchy to hold themselves together began falling apart within hours, some from panic, some from warriors turning violent the moment they could no longer feel where they ranked among each other. Children who had grown up believing their father's strength was as permanent as the mountains watched those same fathers stumble through an ordinary human night for the first time in their lives. Frightened in a way rank had always protected them from feeling. Omegas who had spent years absorbing everyone else's pain without complaint found for a few strange hours that the ground beneath every hierarchy they had ever served had gone as quiet and uncertain as their own lives had always been. Seraphine stood in the center of it all in silver armor, carrying power that was not entirely hers, and declared to everyone still capable of listening that the moon had abandoned them and that she alone remained. Malrek arrived to finish what he had started, informing her almost gently that she had never been meant to rule permanently at all. She was a vessel, nothing more, and once the transfer from Alara's moon mark was complete, he intended to kill her and take the gathered power for himself. Seraphine understood in that moment that she had spent her entire life being used by exactly the kind of man she had trusted to protect her. She did not retreat from the system that had made her this way. She killed Malrek instead and continued the ritual alone, stolen power cracking visibly through her skin as she refused to release any of it. Kael reached the temple badly wounded, and Seraphine seized him the moment he arrived, forcing Alara into the one choice she had built the entire war around. "Give me the moon mark," Seraphine said, "or watch him die." Alara went to him rather than to Seraphine's demand. Kael was bleeding from more wounds than she could count at a glance, and Seraphine's blade rested close enough against his throat to make the choice look simple from the outside. "Do not trade the future of thousands for me," Kael said, forcing the words out through the pain. "I once saved you because I believed your life belonged to me. Today I love you enough to understand that it never belonged to anyone but you." Alara did not surrender the moon mark. She also did not step back from him. Instead of drawing on her own strength alone, she reached outward toward the freed Omegas standing at the edge of the ritual floor, toward the defecting Lunas who had thrown down their ceremonial emblems days earlier, toward the Alphas who had chosen at real cost to themselves to give up the privilege they had inherited without ever earning it. Each of them offered a small part of their own strength freely, and for the first time in longer than anyone in that hall could remember, power did not travel upward from the weak into a single ruler. It moved sideways between equals in a shape the old Alpha Order had never once permitted. The shared strength steadied Kael without placing him in anyone's debt. It reached the drained prisoners still recovering below without crowning a new ruler over them either. Light returned to the sky as though it had simply been waiting for a door to open somewhere. The moon goddess did not appear in any form flesh could hold, but her voice moved through the ruined temple and out across the whole continent, low and unhurried. "I never asked you to kneel before strength," it said. "I only waited for you to learn how to stand together." Every weapon in the hall fell from the hands holding it at the exact same moment. Seraphine's borrowed magic broke apart entirely, and with it went the false bond, the stolen marks, and whatever remained of Moon Temple's authority to tell anyone what they were worth. Seraphine stayed standing in the wreckage of it, her body cracking further under power that had never been fully hers, and looked out at the Alphas now free of every enchantment that had ever bent them. "Look at them," she said, laughing in a way that had nothing left of amusement in it. "Even after the moon chose you, they will never bow to an Omega." No invisible force pushed anyone toward the ground. No spell reached for a single knee. Ilara stood before them, without a crown, and Kael removed the Alpha emblem from his own chest and began walking toward her, while every pack in the hall watched to see what he would do with it. Seraphine screamed after him that Alara had stolen her crown, her future, and the life she had been promised since she was a child, too young to have chosen any of it herself. "No one stole your crown," Alara said. "You traded it away the day you decided power mattered more than people." Seraphine ordered the Lunas still loyal to her to attack. None of them moved. One by one they unfastened their own ceremonial emblems and stepped back from her, and Seraphine understood, watching the last of them go, that she had not been defeated by anyone's greater magic. She had been defeated the moment no one believed the image she had spent her whole life constructing. She lunged at Alara one final time anyway. Alara broke the stolen power still burning inside her, but did not take her life, choosing instead to strip her of power, title, and privilege, and to let her live long enough to learn the name of every Omega who had died to build the life she had almost kept. Kael knelt first, removing the Alpha emblem entirely rather than simply lowering it. "I kneel because I once had the power to protect you and chose silence instead," he said. "I kneel to admit that strength never placed me above you." An old alpha from the northern packs knelt next and confessed in front of everyone that his people had enslaved omegas for 3 generations before that night. A younger alpha knelt because his own father had killed his omega mother years earlier. A Luna who had protected her position through years of careful silence knelt because silence, she finally admitted, had been its own kind of cruelty. One by one, every alpha still standing on that battlefield went to their knees, not because the moon forced their bodies down, but because it had finally shown them a truth they had spent their whole lives arranging their armor to avoid. Elara walked through them without accepting a crown from a single one. She carried her old blood-stained broom out into the center of the square instead and set it down where everyone could see it. "I do not want a world where omegas stand above alphas," she said. "I want a world where no one is born to kneel beneath another." She ended birth-based rank that day, dissolved the Luna selection ceremony along with the forced marriages it had always produced, and stripped Moon Temple of any authority to decide who deserved love and who did not. Kael rose and offered her his hand without a crown anywhere near it, and Elara chose to take it. A true mate bond rose between them quietly, without chains, without ceremony, without anyone's permission required. "Was that the moon's choice?" Kael asked her. "No," Elara said. "It was ours." Years later, the arena where she had once scrubbed blood before sunrise became a school where the children of Alphas, Lunas, and Omegas studied side by side without anyone assigning them rank at the door. Her old broom sat behind glass in the entryway, a small, deliberately unpolished reminder of exactly where the woman who changed Blackthorn had started. A little girl stopped in front of the case one afternoon and looked up at Elara, who happened to be passing through the hall that day. "Is it true that every alpha knelt before you?" she asked. "No," Elara told her. "They knelt before the truth they had been running from for far too long." The moon rose over the square that evening the way it always did now, without demanding anything from anyone standing beneath it. No one lowered their head. They simply stood together in its light the way the oldest law had always intended before anyone rewrote it for their own convenience. If a story like Elara's stayed with you tonight, there is another waiting just past this one about a different woman who was told she would never be chosen either.